Thanks, Paul. I'm just going to put these the other way because I don't like guilty staring at me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I also have to thank Marlo Thomas for inspiring the topic of tonight's talk, and that's only for those of you who are baby boomers or older. For the rest of you, kind of rhymes with Barney, but I'm not going to sing. So I would like to really start with an idea, and this is an idea that's been forming in my mind for the years I've practiced, because in addition to being a fairly new bencher, for years I practiced in the discipline side, defending lawyers or acting for lawyers when they had complaints against them at the Law Society. So I've had the benefit of a lengthy relationship with the Law Society from a number of different standpoints, and now a slightly different one. But there is an ongoing idea at the heart of the relationship between the profession and you as individuals in the profession and the Law Society as a regulator that I'd like to challenge a little bit tonight and see what you think. We'll have some time for some questions, so I hope you challenge me if you have other points of view. But it all starts from a tension that has been identified by academics and writers, observers of legal matters and regulation, that we have this tension between one of the fundamental ideals of practicing law, which is our autonomy, our independence, and as a criminal bar, we really exemplify the values behind being independent. I mean, our job is to challenge institutions on behalf of vulnerable clients. Our job is to not always be so reverent about powerful institutions that can, in their drive to carry out sort of the public or collective will, can have adverse impacts on individuals. So we have those set of values that are really part of our core values as a bar. But then we have this larger professional mandate. By virtue of being a self-regulating profession, we have to also be responsive and accountable to the public at large and to some of those institutions. So here we have our day-to-day existence. We don't report to managers, we don't have supervisors, we don't live in cubicles. We have tremendous freedom, actually, in time and space in the way that we practice, and in a way that I think after a while you just start to take for granted until you actually start to go into other institutions or maybe take a different position or take a lateral move in your career. And for some, it can end up feeling like an irreconcilable set of values. In other words, the values are in conflict. But my thesis for the evening and the talk tonight is that this is really a false dichotomy, that in fact, each depends on the other to give it life. So really the yin and yang of an all-around complete professional. So if I was to retitle my talk, I would call it Embracing Accountability. And I would cite as evidence the notion that maybe we can look at the complaint function and the discipline function of the Law Society as really giving us, as lawyers, the benefit of a completely outsourced complaints department, with the cost shared among all of us in the profession who are regulated in Ontario. So you can see where I'm going with this, I hope. The Law Society can be thought of, yes, as a support to your practice, even when it's carrying out what some people dread, which is the complaint resolution function. So first of all, I think it's helpful not just to take this hypothesis and say, gee, that sounds great, because I can tell you don't think that yet. So maybe we will start with some numbers. Sometimes numbers help contextualize things. The Law Society receives around 5,000 complaints a year. Of those that come into the Law Society, 95% do not proceed to discipline, do not result in a finding against a lawyer of misconduct. So in any given year, although you may have a 1 in 10 chance of receiving a complaint, the chances of landing in discipline as a result of that complaint is extremely remote. It's sort of an important starting point. But if we go from this kind of context on the numbers, and we can recap it by saying, look, it's part of our professional responsibility. We know that theoretically. We may not like it when it happens to us personally, but theoretically, I think most people would accept it's part of our professional responsibility to maintain the privilege of self-governance. And if we add to it the fact that most complaints are resolved and can be resolved fairly easily, let's talk practical stuff then. How can you make the process as smooth as possible? I think the first thing, and this now comes from the fact that not only am I now practicing law, I also run really a small complaints department at the City of Toronto when people complain about councillors. So in the course of doing that, I've been able to meet some people whose job is to process complaints in rather large amounts. So it helps to understand from the point of view of the complaint receiver what that's like. The first thing is they have to review and consider every complaint. The fact is that some people will make complaints in a way that's a bit like the needle in the haystack. There might be a haystack of confusing, difficult to understand, perhaps not very appropriate language. But a regulator can't just say, well, you didn't type this up nice and neatly, or your fonts don't match, or you seem to be talking about things that are wholly irrelevant. If there's a kernel of a complaint in there, and it deals with a lawyer, and it's within the jurisdiction of the Law Society, yes, they have to kind of march through a number of steps, just as they would for somebody who puts together a tight brief and has it all, the I's dotted and the T's crossed. But some of them aren't even within their jurisdiction. You can imagine complaint receiving people often are a shop, they've had their door knocked on along with 5 other doors of other agencies that might receive complaints. Those ones will go elsewhere immediately. They'll be referred out. No jurisdiction, we can't help you with that. This is a matter between you and your lawyer, and fees, here's where you go to assess the account. And you won't hear about those. Some can be resolved by a telephone call to the lawyer or a letter. Some of them will look more like a formal investigation, but even those ones, investigation is no signal that this is marching down an inexorable path to discipline. It's merely, we need a response, we need your side of the story, we need some information, or we may need to meet and speak with you. But it's important to remember that in all of those scenarios, unless and until it gets to that discipline phase, which is kind of like in the criminal process, somebody's sworn in information and now it's in the formal track. Until then, it's being handled confidentially. You are required to respond, or you could face a finding of failing to respond. So the most important take-home message for new lawyers who are watching or here tonight, you must respond. It's worse for you if you don't, but it's unlikely to become a big problem when you do. And solicitor-client privilege is not a shield for your files. It's not a breach of privilege to respond to the Law Society. You're required by statute to respond. So you're best served by thinking of your communications in response to these complaints. The 3 Ps, keep it professional, make it prompt, and be prepared. Your goal is to get the file closed with your response, and if necessary, take appropriate action to respond to whatever is the substantive part of the complaint. Nadia Leva, my colleague, wrote an article a year ago called You've Got Mail in the CLA newsletter, and she makes the point beautifully. She writes, it's therefore critical that you do cooperate and provide information at the early stage of the complaint process. The quality of your cooperation will ripple through the entire investigation. And I love the word she chose because I just picture immediately this stone in the pond and the ripple effect. As lawyers, we know that sometimes the very tone of how we deal with an issue matters as much as the substance. So that if your first chance to show the regulator, the person who's received the complaint, that you are able to assist them, and you're going to do it professionally, and you're going to give them all the detail they need, you've now moved 5 steps up the ladder pretty quickly. Instead of one at a time or grudgingly giving a piece of information, and then they have to come back to you. And when I was acting for lawyers, I sometimes thought, you know, they've got this sort of scenario in mind where they see the regulator almost as sort of this sort of bad parent role, that they put every issue they ever had with their parents as teenagers onto the regulator, or they mistakenly sort of project sort of that anti-authoritarian feeling onto the person dealing with their file. But if you can look at it more the way the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic deals with complaints, they have a very plain language section of their website that says in big bold letters, if you are dissatisfied with our services, you have a right to complain. And they have a very clear policy. They describe for the people that they are serving if they feel they didn't get a good quality of service or if they weren't treated appropriately. They can complain, and here's how you do it. And that's really, any institution right now worth its salt is going to have a complaints policy. Why would we be different as a profession? We've had one for years. But I suppose because it's external to us, sometimes it's easy to kind of chafe against that, or the letter will come in at the absolute wrong time when you're busy doing 5 million other things and it feels like a stress. So how do you achieve the best quality that Nadia was talking about and an early resolution? Well, look at it this way. If it's a little trouble and it's only a little worry to you, you can probably fix it and respond. It's always good advice to pass your response by a trusted colleague or a mentor. But if it's bigger trouble, or even if it's a little trouble, and everyone's telling you it's little trouble, but it's a bigger worry for you, then I think it's even more advised to turn to a colleague or a mentor to offload either the emotional stress of it, or to find out if you really do have something to worry about and how to best manage it, or to hire somebody who does this kind of work. You might also decide whether your situation can benefit from some of the supports that exist via the Law Society, but not offered directly by them, and certainly not by the complaints people. So you may have heard of the Ontario Legal Assistance Program. It's funded by the Law Society, but it's managed independently, and it's a confidential referral to counseling if there are drug, alcohol issues, emotional issues, money issues, and they'll put you in touch with people who can help. Or you may be receiving a complaint because you're involved in something that's a much more complicated dynamic where you feel you're being harassed by somebody or discriminated against by somebody. And there's confidential sort of problem solving by Cynthia Peterson, who's the Discrimination and Harassment Counsel at the Law Society. So there are some things that run in parallel to situations that might bring a complaint across your desk that can help. It can be helpful to consider the nature of the complaints business, to think about how a matter-of-fact, cooperative, and positive attitude towards receiving a complaint can serve you well. The Law Society's core business is receiving complaints, and they receive them from all demographics. I went to a program that was put on by the New South Wales Ombudsman about a year ago, last fall, and as a joint project of all the ombudsmen who were complaint takers against government officials and officers, they created a manual on managing unreasonable complainant conduct, it's a wonderful manual because what it does is it allows you a window into people who are managing and handling thousands of complaints a year. And one of the things that they hear that you may not even be aware of, but it's part of their reality, is that often complainants also attack the complaint handlers. So that their complaint to you may be one of a number of complaints that will include how your complaint is being managed internally. And sometimes they will have complaints that change as soon as the original complaint is solved. They call that moving the goalposts. Other times they may make either reasonable or unreasonable claims of bias or corruption on the part of the person managing the complaints. And I think, for me at least, knowing that helps me understand how to respond to a complaint in a way that makes it even more likely that it will be a more, if not positive, at least not a negative experience. And it can be dealt with professionally and more like the professional you are when you deal with other people's problems. The book is wonderful, actually. It even helps because one of the things that might happen with us and can happen with us is that a complaint to the Law Society may start with a complaint to you. You may just not recognize it as a complaint, but it may be an issue or somebody says something that gives you a feeling that somebody's not happy. And if you can take on the role of being the complaint manager, you may as well be able to head off the issue before it becomes a more formal complaint and basically before the molehill becomes closer to being a mountain or something in between. So it's helpful to remember and consider strategies in dealing with complaints. I can tell you that this handbook, which includes even things like how to make a proper apology, believe it or not, there's a really good science behind how to craft a good apology. It's available online at the New South Wales Ombudsman's website. It's called Managing Unreasonable Complainant Conduct Practice Manual. And I commend it to you if you ever do come across a situation where you feel like you have to manage a complaint in a way that will allow it to be resolved before it becomes more formal or before it becomes to the regulator. One other sort of substantive area I wanted to mention before we have a discussion. When do you have a duty to complain? Sometimes you have to complain. And there have been some changes to the rule. When I first started practicing, it was essentially only if you knew someone had stolen trust money. There was no other situation where you had a positive duty as a lawyer to complain. But that's been amended. Rule 6.013 of our Rules of Conduct require lawyers to complain where they're aware of not only misappropriation of trust money, but where, if you became aware that somebody had just walked away from their law practice and abandoned it, obviously, if you're aware of that, you have to bring that to the regulator's attention so steps can be taken to prevent prejudice to clients. If you're aware of a lawyer involved in serious criminal activity in relation to their practice. If you're aware of a lawyer whose mental capacity has become so serious that clients are prejudiced, or indeed any situation where you become aware of serious client prejudice, there is a positive duty to report where you're expected to become the complainant. When are you expected to complain about yourself? Well, there is a situation where you are expected to advise the Law Society or complain about yourself if you like. If you are charged with a hybrid or indictable offense, either under the Criminal Code or the CDSA or under the Income Tax Act, or a dishonesty relating to the practice, you would refer to bylaw 8 sub 1 or perhaps consult with another colleague. But you may have, if you're facing charges yourself, a positive duty, again, to report. And these would be sort of on the regulator side. There may be corresponding duties relating to your insurer as well, which I'm not going to talk about tonight, but I'll just mention it for the sake of completeness. So, by way of summing up, in defending lawyers and advising them on complaints for over 20 years, I can tell you that I've never seen what I saw to be a miscarriage of justice in the way a complaint was handled if the lawyer responded appropriately and provided the information. The Law Society has a fairly stratified way of getting complaints before discipline. You don't see a lot of withdrawals because they get reviewed by a panel of benchers, and there are people that oversee the complaint resolution process, and they report to Convocation regularly about how they're doing. Sometimes they've taken longer than people have wanted them to take to be resolved, but I have also found that if people follow up with the Law Society, again professionally, and remind them that this may be having an impact on someone's career or profession, and advise them there might be some urgency, that gets responded to. And as I said before, the tone can be as important as the content. Why unnecessarily irritate someone whose job it is to close your file and see that you actually did everything appropriately when you're responding to a complaint? And finally, to come back to where I started, the stakes are not nearly as high as people may initially perceive them to be when they get a letter from the Law Society. It's far more likely that it's all going to end without drama. So that's the bigger picture I wanted to talk about. My thesis is that it's part of what goes along with our independence and autonomy, and it needn't be a difficult process, and perhaps as the Ombudsman from New South Wales challenged us, because he was speaking to a group of complaint takers, perhaps you will come to relish grappling with difficult complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I had requested if there were any questions, that if anyone would like to approach or email questions would be appreciated. In the interim, I do have a question. I don't know if you want to answer this or not. One of the greatest things that I hear from young counsel is we're terrified of Law Society. And I know, and I heard loud and clear that there's a mandate not only that we have to comply and cooperate when their letters are there or sent to you. I just, if you can reiterate why they don't have to fear the Law Society, why is it so important? Because I've seen so many young counsel make a terrible error by not responding promptly, not obtaining counsel, not seeking out other lawyers more senior to them, just for simple advice. Can you just give us some good words of wisdom?
I'll do my best. I think the thing to remember is that the Law Society is staffed by people who take their professionalism seriously. And I don't know if you follow things like the 10 best employers, those competitions they have, but the Law Society has consistently been found to be one of the best employers. And to me, that speaks fairly highly for its functionality as an organization. And I can say that there's a high degree of professionalism on the part of the directors at the Law Society, and they in turn report to us, the benchers. We meet every month in committee, and then we meet in convocation. So there is this oversight of the regulator, which is an important piece. And everyone has to be overseen by somebody else. Everybody is. Anybody who takes complaints ultimately has someone they report to. And so I guess the first part of the question was, why be terrified of an organization whose reason for being is to allow you to continue to practice? And once you understand that that's part of what allows us to be independent, and if you think it's just a fairy story that maybe that could disappear, well, in 4 states in Australia, it did disappear. The government took over regulation of the lawyers because it was perceived that the complaints department of their law societies was nothing more than a drop box, a post office box, and nobody ever got anything done because the complaints weren't handled and the serious ones did not result in any sanction. Our Law Society isn't like that. Yes, you can see the sanctions, and now if people do face discipline, it's public, and it's on the website and all the rest of it. All the more reason to handle it earlier. But believe me, and I've worked there with a lot of different people, I do not see a gotcha mentality in any way. They're carrying out a mandate that allows us to carry out ours. And of course, that's not going to mean that when you, or if you get a complaint letter next week, you're still not going to say, oh no, what is this? And feel your guts clench up for a second. Why not? It's human nature. It's like being pulled over for a speeding ticket. People get afraid of that too, even defense lawyers. But you have the feeling and then come back to, okay, let's be rational about this. I know I didn't do anything wrong. People will complain, and my job is to respond. And if I don't feel up to it, or my personal life is difficult right now and this feels like just too big a cross to bear, guess what? You have people you can call. Just like what Paul was saying at the beginning, you can call people to ask them legal questions. Well, these questions are fair game too. You can call your friends, call your mentors, call people older than you, call people and ask them who you should call. And believe me, people will take those calls because we all understand. I mean, that's part of we're in this together. We all understand what that feels like. And people will help you get through it and give you good advice. And we'll read your letters and say, you know what, this word makes you sound defensive, just take it out. Or this sounds like a rant, not necessary to answer the complaint. So that would be what I would say.
They say that only a fool defends himself, so don't do that. There's my fatherly speech, I guess. I just want to thank Janet Leeper. Her time is important. She's been a dear friend to me for many years, for 20 years. She's also been a great mentor and someone who's given me great opportunities in sharing cases, and I just publicly express my gratitude once again tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.